On November 25th, 2020, it was the day before Thanksgiving, I received a phone call shortly after 4 o'clock from the Mount Morris police chief. And he asked me kind of frantically, is anybody at my house? And I said, my daughter Melissa is. And so there's a fire. And it's bad.
My sister Melissa, she was 9 months pregnant, about to have a baby in 2 days.
What do you remember from November 25th, 2020?
It was my 17th birthday. My birthday is November 25th. Me and my mom were at a store. We were picking out a cake, and we finally got home, and my brother Carl frantically is calling my mom, have you heard from Melissa? Have you heard from Melissa? And we're like, no, why?
Carl said, the neighbor called, and he said the house is on fire. So at that point, my heart just sank because we were not sure if Melissa was home or not. I just wanted them both to be okay. And all I could think was, please just have one of them, at least one of them, make it through the night.
When everyone said they didn't know where she was and they couldn't hear from her, I knew. Just had that gut feeling that she was gone.
For a huge tragedy like that to occur the day before Thanksgiving, on Julia's birthday, right before the baby was to be born, it was just so much.
When I arrived at the scene, I was told the victim was found laying on the floor in front of the stove. Melissa Lamesch was a 27-year-old EMT. We're trying to figure out why there's a fire in the kitchen. We couldn't tell if it was intentional or accidental. There was all kinds of possibilities running through our heads, but we didn't know what happened to her.
My daughter Melissa, she's very thoughtful, and that's why she got into being a paramedic. She wanted to help people.
When Melissa first told me she was pregnant, she told me a couple things about the dad. Matt Plody, they on and off hung out for years and had a similar clique of friends.
Matt Plody was a firefighter paramedic. He was a good firefighter. Matt was somebody that was dependable on the fire scene. He was just one of the guys.
He was keeping a secret the fact that he fathered a baby in the hopes that the child wouldn't be born.
For Matt, he never had a child before. He didn't want to make it known to other people because he just wanted to keep that part of his life private.
Matthew Plody was a person of interest on day one, simply because he was at the scene.
Matthew Plody later told investigators that he was at the house to see Melissa to talk about the baby.
He admitted he was there. He told them everything that they would have needed to know about his presence there. He didn't have anything to hide. They discussed their finances, and then Matt left as she was making some lunch.
She talked about cooking some food or something, but I didn't stay around.
I believe from the very beginning he was trying to set up a story that there was an accidental house fire, that she had been cooking something, which would explain why her body was found in the kitchen.
When you got the call about Matthew Plody possibly being involved in a murder, what did you think?
Denial that it wasn't one of our people. It doesn't chime with what a firefighter is. We put fires out, we don't start fires. We help people, we don't hurt people. It is unthinkable.
Before the fire that set Melissa Lamesch's home ablaze on November 25, 2020, the day had started with excited anticipation. Melissa was due to give birth to a baby boy in just 2 days, and Thanksgiving was a day away.
She was going to have a nice private Thanksgiving with Dad. So I gave her a call the morning of the 25th, and we talked for about 2.5 hours.
Cassie Ball and her sister Melissa had lots to chat about.
We talked a lot about the future. We talked about what was going to come with the baby. The conversation ended because she looked outside the window. She said, "You got to be kidding me." She's like, "He's freaking here again. I told him he's got to stop doing this."
At the door was 33-year-old Matthew Plody, the expectant father of Melissa's baby.
She said, "I'll tell you what he wanted. I'll give you a call right back. Bye." Hung up.
Did she ever call back?
No, my sister never called back.
Melissa Lamesch and Matthew Plody met and became friends 7 years earlier while each was in college. They maintained a casual relationship. The friendship, says the Lamesch family, cooled off once Melissa let Matthew know about the pregnancy. Melissa told her family he did not share her interest in becoming a parent.
He wanted her to get an abortion. She didn't want that. He blamed her, ghosted her. It did come to upset Melissa because they were friends for so long.
She thought he'd at least want to be involved a little bit.
Yes. Melissa thought that he would want something to do with the baby. To that point, she thought he was a pretty nice guy. Then she saw a different side of him, and that really upset her.
Deanna and Gus were fully prepared to help their daughter with whatever she needed for the baby.
I had said, if he doesn't want to be a part of the baby's life, don't push. The baby is your child.
We told her whatever you needed, I'll help you financially.
She knew she had plenty of family support. Everything would have been fine.
The Lamesch family was a large one. Melissa had 4 siblings. She was already an aunt and was known for following her own path.
Melissa was unapologetically herself, and that is what she was. She's the perfect mix of sugar and spice. Not too spicy, not too sugary, it's just perfect.
Melissa was strong. She was fierce. She was a go-getter.
Melissa liked to reinvent herself through hairstyles and careers. Most recently, the 27-year-old had been working as an EMT.
Melissa kind of fell into the line of work. She had an experience in college that took her to an emergency room, and she really appreciated how she was treated, and she wanted to do the same for other people.
You're proud?
Yes, it was her job, and she took it seriously.
As her due date neared, Melissa had to stop working. To make things easier, she moved into her childhood home with her dad. Her parents had divorced several years earlier. Melissa grew increasingly excited about becoming a mom, even though she and Matthew had little contact.
Melissa would continue to send him like sonograms or when things would happen, because sometimes he would respond a little bit, but she didn't know really where he stood exactly. But Melissa wanted her baby to have the option of having the mother and the father. So she kept the communication with him. He often shut down.
Matthew wasn't just shutting out Melissa. He kept the fact he was going to be a father a secret, including from his co-workers and Chief Rob Schultz at the Carroll Stream Fire District, several counties away from Melissa's home.
We're here 24 hours a day, and it's just a normal course of being a firefighter, and that you talk about your family, your personal life, and what's going on, good, bad, or indifferent. Well, I knew Matt as a single guy that didn't have any kids.
Even Matthew's own parents did not know about the pregnancy until Melissa told them.
Melissa wanted them to have the opportunity to be a part of their grandchild's life.
How did Melissa say his parents responded to the news of a grandson?
Melissa said that his parents were very nice, that they said, "Let me know what you need. I'll help you any way we can."
How did Matthew find out that Melissa had told his parents they were having a baby?
I believe that the parents then approached him, but it was not long after that that she had said, "He's mad I told them."
Because he had kept it a secret?
Yeah.
Melissa celebrated the upcoming birth with family and friends at a baby shower. She had let everyone know she was having a boy. It was a happy time until nearly 2 months later on that fateful Thanksgiving Eve.
It was just all so surreal.
While Melissa's family tried to process their loss, investigators were hoping to provide them with answers about what had happened.
The fire debris is everywhere.
Brian Ketter, then the lead detective at the Ogle County Sheriff's Office, headed to the kitchen where Melissa had been found.
Everything's covered in smoke. Ceilings, walls have fallen down, and everything's a mess.
Ketter and other investigators also headed outside to an ambulance to view Melissa.
We've noticed that she didn't have a whole lot of fire damage to her,
What does that say?
that the fire didn't kill her.
We needed to identify the area of fire origin and what may have caused that fire.
Michael Poole, then a special agent with the Illinois State Fire Marshal's Office, was trying to establish whether the fire at Melissa Lamesch's home was accidental or intentionally set.
What are you looking for?
Where the greatest damage is at, where the fire patterns are at, we're looking at everything in this picture that may have something to do with the origin of the fire.
Where do you think the fire started?
I believe the fire's over here. Actually, it's in these cabinets, where these cabinets used to be above the stove area.
But when Poole examined the stove, thinking that perhaps cooking flames caused the cabinets to catch fire, he saw that neither the oven nor the burners had been turned on.
All the controls are in the off position, and there is no fire damage in the interior of this oven to show that this was some type of cooking fire.
Poole also did not find any electrical issues.
So we're starting to run out of accidental causes. And we could identify at least 3 very simple and easy ways to exit this residence.
Much of the house besides the kitchen remained accessible, so Poole thought Melissa could have found a way out.
It was what I would call a survivable fire. This young lady was a paramedic. She's used to dealing with emergencies. For her to totally lose her perspective and stand there and try and fight that fire, when you start putting all these things together, then you start coming up with, okay, this makes no sense.
While Poole was inspecting the house, investigators talked with the Lamesch family. Ketter learned about the phone call that day between Melissa and Cassie that Melissa ended when Matthew Plody arrived at the house.
We learned from the family that he was a fireman.
Melissa's brother Carl told investigators he had already spoken on the phone to Plody, telling him he knew he had been at the house that day. Carl also told Plody about the fire and that someone had died, but not that it was Melissa. Investigators did that when they asked Plody to come in for an interview that evening.
Melissa is deceased.
As you watched his interview, what did you think about his demeanor, his responses?
Emotionless, very soft-spoken. Matthew said he went to talk to Melissa. He wanted to talk about money, about being allowed at the hospital when she was set to be induced in 2 days, and that's why he was there.
In that interview, Matthew made a reference to a deadline when explaining his decision to go to the house that day.
There's a deadline for that, so we were trying to do the deadline for a pregnancy. There's a deadline.
It was a phrase that investigators didn't quite know how to interpret.
Was Matthew a suspect at that point?
No, he was not a suspect.
What are the next steps in the investigation?
We need to determine the cause of death. We don't know if Melissa had a medical episode or if somebody did something to her or if the carbon monoxide from the fire killed her. We don't know.
To get those answers, 2 autopsies would be performed. One 2 days after Melissa's death, and then another about 2 weeks later while lab work was completed. The results? Normal carbon monoxide levels, and no soot was found in her system. What was found was evidence of strangulation, including hemorrhages around her neck. Melissa, it was determined, had been murdered.
We have to plan a funeral, and while we were still waiting for things, it was nearly 3 weeks.
On December 14th, 2020, the Lamesch family held a funeral for Melissa and her unborn baby, who Melissa was going to name Barrett.
We didn't get to kiss his forehead, touch his cheek. The first time we got any kind of contact, they were in a casket. And the first time I touched his hand, I just remember gasping, and I had decided I was gonna keep holding his hand. Something Melissa didn't get to do.
Melissa's family was convinced that Matthew Plody was responsible for their profound grief, that he killed Melissa simply because he did not want to become a father. Matthew, investigators would learn, had been juggling multiple women in his life.
I believe he did it because he's selfish and it was going to change his life having a child.
Melissa wasn't asking him for anything. No money, nothing. He could have walked away, so why?
I think it was his pride. He wanted to keep it a secret.
With no other suspects, and with Matthew admitting to being at Melissa's home that day, investigators were also circling in on Plody, but were still gathering evidence.
We had collected DNA evidence at the autopsy, and we sent that to the crime lab. We'd gotten search warrants for phone records. We were in the process of getting that information back.
They were also waiting to get information back from Amazon about possible recordings from an Echo Dot that Ketter had noticed and was retrieved from the fire-damaged kitchen.
We were hoping it would record conversations or something from the day between the two of them.
That Amazon Echo Dot could turn this case around.
Could have. It could have recorded Melissa screaming for help, yelling out his name. We didn't know what it would be.
I was contacted by our police chief to give him a call immediately that he had something very important, sensitive to talk about.
When Carroll Stream Fire Chief Rob Schultz returned the call, he couldn't believe what he was hearing.
One of our firefighters was being investigated in a suspect in a murder that occurred about 2 hours from our fire district's boundaries.
It was now 9 months since Melissa Lamesch's death in a house fire that had sent shockwaves through the community in Mount Morris, where her home was located. But firefighters where Matthew Plody worked in Carroll Stream, about 75 miles away, were unaware of the fire. Plody had said nothing.
When you heard the name Matthew Plody in that call, what did you think?
I was, there's no way this could be Matt. They have something wrong here.
But that disbelief started to change when Chief Schultz checked to see if Plody worked the day of the fire and learned he had called out sick.
That knot in my stomach, literally wanted to throw up.
The fire chief's sinking feeling only got worse when he learned that investigators believed Matthew killed Melissa and their unborn child because he did not want to be a father, and then set the house on fire in hopes of destroying evidence.
We had placed Matt immediately on paid administrative leave. When I called Matt in to tell him, I just said, I'm being told that you're under investigation for a murder of your estranged girlfriend and the baby that you're a father of.
Did you ask him why he hadn't mentioned it?
Didn't feel that it was something that he wanted to talk about, and he felt it was a personal matter and didn't want to disclose it.
While on leave on August 28, 2021, Matthew Plody was called in again for questioning.
My name is Brian. I'm a lieutenant with the Sheriff's Office.
Plody willingly appeared without an attorney.
I want to contribute and be in the life of our child.
Over the course of the 7-hour interview, he explained to investigators why he was at Melissa's the day of the fire.
So we talked about, what I could pay her, and that we just said we'd work it out later to visiting.
He said when he left that afternoon, Melissa was talking about making lunch.
She talked about trying to make some food or something, but I didn't stay around.
Most of the 7 hours was filled with investigators asking questions and Matthew Plody saying very little.
So did you go there to kill her? Or did you just go there to talk to her and something happened?
We kept accusing him of things, and he never said, I didn't do it. He never said, you guys got the wrong person. He was just emotionless, and he wouldn't communicate. Not once in 7 hours, not once did he get upset. Most people would have told us, I'm done, but he just sat and listened to us.
Had you ever experienced an interview like that before?
Never.
It wasn't just the lack of communication that made Lieutenant Ketter think Plody was guilty, but on the rare times Plody did talk, the unusual way he phrased things.
Did you intend to kill her? I had no intention of hurting Melissa.
During that 7-hour interview, at one point, Matthew did say, I had no intentions of hurting Melissa.
Did that make you do a double take?
Yes, because in our opinion, that means I hurt Melissa, but I didn't intend to do it.
But it was not an admission of guilt. So Ketter wanted to see if Plody would say anything more and made an unusual request of Fire Chief Schultz.
We asked Chief Schultz if he would wear a listening device so that he would have a conversation with Matthew. We would be able to hear it and record it and try to gain some evidence that way.
When Brian asks this of me, I'm pretty taken back. And initially I had said no way. And I did some thinking about it and called him back and said yes.
You have a lot of responsibilities as a fire chief, but I can't imagine you ever thought wearing a wiretap would be one of them.
No. I don't freely talk about it. It's not something that I'm proud of. It was something that needed to be done in the hopes of helping the investigation. There's a grieving family out there that's looking for answers.
And so on September 9th, 2021, Chief Schultz called Matthew Plody and asked him to come in to talk.
And he agreed. He says, I'd like to come talk to you.
Matthew came in later that day. The fire station was quickly cleared of all other personnel, and Brian Ketter and other investigators headed over. They were able to place a device that just recorded audio on a phone on Fire Chief Schultz's desk and listened in from outside the fire station and from an adjoining office.
How are you feeling?
Nervous, very nervous, a bit scared.
Chief Schultz tried to learn what happened to Melissa by appealing to Plody on a personal level.
I'm trying to find answers, and I'm trying to help you. Help me walk through, what happened?
But the nearly 2-hour conversation yielded very little info from Plody, with him again barely speaking about the day Melissa died.
I remember saying, fill in all the blanks for me. And isn't it odd that no one here knows that you're going to be a father? Like, that's something we celebrate here.
What do you say?
Nothing. Head was down a lot of the conversation.
Did he ever say, I didn't kill Melissa and my baby?
He did not.
With none of the interviews resulting in a confession, there was still no arrest, something that exasperated the Lamesch family.
Oh, it was excruciating. And I mean, we were pestering the police constantly.
There were several reasons for the delay. There was the wait for the fire marshal's report, which concluded that the fire cause is most likely incendiary in nature, possibly the result of a fire being intentionally set in an effort to conceal a potential homicide. And getting information from Amazon on whether Matthew's voice was recorded on that echo dot they retrieved from the kitchen took time.
It did reveal voices, but nothing that proved helpful for our case. It wasn't even on the day of the murder.
Investigators had also waited to obtain Matthew Ploty's DNA until after the August 2021 interview, hoping he would first confess to killing Melissa.
We got the results back saying that it was his DNA under her fingernails.
Turn around, hands behind your back.
On March 9th, 2022, after a year and a half of investigating Melissa Lamesch's death, with a police body cam rolling, Matthew Ploty was arrested on charges including murder, the intentional homicide of an unborn child, and arson.
Technically, right now, you are under arrest.
The motive that the state painted was just an inaccurate portrayal of Matt.
By the time of Matthew Ploty's arrest, he had hired attorney John Cupp.
They painted him to be this monster that, at the drop of a hat, after a career of saving people, decided to suddenly start killing people.
You were indicted by the grand jury.
The evidence doesn't show that Matthew Ploty murdered Melissa Lamesch or their unborn child.
Melissa Lamesch was loved. This is not someone who had enemies lined up around the block who wanted to see her deceased. Rather, there was one person and one person only, and that was Matthew Ploty.
Yesterday.
Assistant State's Attorneys Allison Huntley and Heather Cruz were part of the team prosecuting Matthew Ploty.
All signs pointed toward Matthew Ploty from the very beginning.
What we wanted to portray to the jury is that he was a guy saving lives for his entire career.
Defense attorneys John Cupp and Liam Dixon say their client was misunderstood and as a firefighter was a responsible person, not a murderer.
Matt's plan was to financially support her. He had offered her money before. His plan was to be there.
Matthew Ploty pleaded not guilty to all charges. On March 18, 2024, more than 3 years since Melissa's murder, his trial began in Ogle County, Illinois. The prosecution argued that Ploty murdered Melissa and their unborn child because he didn't want to be a father.
He was keeping a secret the fact that he fathered a baby in the hopes that the child wouldn't be born.
The defense told the jury there's no evidence Ploty harmed Melissa and that he had gone to see her that day just to talk.
They discussed their finances. They discussed what would happen with the birth of the child. And then Matt left as she was making some lunch.
I believe from the very beginning he was trying to set up a story that there was an accidental house fire, that she had been cooking something. I believe that was how he laid out the scene, which would explain why her body was found in the kitchen.
Prosecutors called fire investigator Michael Poole to testify about his findings. He told the court that he found no evidence of an electrical or cooking fire.
And you start ruling these various different things out.
How certain are you that this fire was intentionally set?
I'm certain that it was intentionally set.
No doubt.
No doubt.
During cross-examination, the defense suggested that Michael Poole was unsure of his findings, citing language in his report such as most likely and it is believed.
You use the phrase, it is believed, because that's an uncertain opinion, correct?
It's just the way I described it.
But that's an uncertain opinion, correct?
Not to me.
Poole says he was just using standard terms used during fire investigations.
I review information.
The state also called forensic pathologist Dr. Amanda Humans, who had performed one of the autopsies.
There was no soot in her airways. And her measure of carbon monoxide in the blood was within normal limits. So she was deceased prior to the fire.
Dr. Humans testified that Melissa's body showed evidence of a violent struggle. The jury heard about the hemorrhages around Melissa's neck, a specific type of broken blood vessels called petechial hemorrhages, which according to Dr. Humans is a telltale sign of strangulation.
This is the most petechial hemorrhages I've ever seen in a strangulation case.
To sit through trial was beyond devastating.
Deanna Lamesch came to court every day.
I had been prepped by the victim's advocate. Things were going to be gruesome. I was going to see a lot.
Deanna says she always kept Melissa and her baby Barrett in her thoughts.
She was so strong-willed and had such pride. That baby was going to be a strong guy.
Matthew Plotey's parents also attended the trial.
They've been by his side throughout this?
Yes, every court date.
One of the most important witnesses to testify was Melissa's sister Cassie, talking about the day Melissa died and that call, which Cassie says was interrupted by Matthew Plotey.
What was the last thing your sister said to you during that phone call? Sorry. She said she'd make the conversation quick and she'd call me right back. Did Melissa call you back? No.
Jurors watched those recorded interviews with investigators, where Matthew Plotey admitted he was at the house.
How long were you at the house? It wasn't more than an hour, I don't think.
Prosecutors wanted jurors to hear that phrase Plotey used,
And there's a deadline for that. So
referring to the birth of his son as a deadline.
He said, there's a deadline to these kinds of things. That was his deadline to murder Melissa.
If you think about it logically, Thursday is Thanksgiving and Friday is her due date, his deadline. The only time to do this was Wednesday. So he took off work and completed his goal.
The prosecutors found even more telling what Plotey didn't say, especially during that 7-hour interview, 4 hours of which were played for the jury.
What is chilling is the fact that he never denied murdering Melissa, and he never denied killing her baby boy. Not one time. It's chilling from a personal perspective, but that's also excellent evidence that the defendant couldn't bring himself to lie about that fact.
Over the course of multiple interviews for several hours, he was calm and reserved.
His silence, defense says, actually points to his innocence, not his guilt.
He had a right to remain silent, but the police are allowed to continue to poke and prod and try to get him confused, and he just didn't buy into any of that.
They say their client, when he did speak, was open with investigators.
He told them everything about his presence there. He didn't hide any of that. He just never admitted what they wanted him to admit, which was that he killed Melissa and his child, which he didn't do.
Do you think the fact that the fire didn't burn down the whole house, does that play in Matthew's favor or not?
I believe it does. If he's a firefighter and he's trying to destroy evidence, you would think he would have the ability to set a fire to complete that goal.
But during 3 days of testimony, the state laid out the case that it could have only been Matthew Plotey who set that fire to conceal evidence of the murder of Melissa and their unborn baby, something the defense was about to contest.
The state's fire expert deemed that this was arson.
He did, and we had an expert who directly contradicted that.
What do you think of Matthew Plotey's interview with investigators? Join the conversation on Facebook and X.
The state's expert didn't do a fraction of what he should have done to properly determine the cause of the fire. This should have been an undetermined fire.
To try to poke holes in the prosecution's case, the defense called only one witness, retired firefighter and independent inspector John Knapp. He was not at the scene of the fire, but did study reports and photos.
I felt like there was probably more information that could have been gathered that wasn't there.
He disputed the prosecution's claim that Plotey set the fire. He testified that the evidence collected doesn't prove that the fire was intentionally set by anyone.
I couldn't make that determination to whether or not what the cause of the fire should be other than determined.
When you're not there at the scene, you don't see what we've seen. Not always does every little tidbit end up in a report.
Michael Poole says the defense's expert is wrong and that his investigation was thorough.
We're looking for anything and everything that could have contributed to the origins of this fire. If they weren't there, you needed to be there when we were doing the examination.
Matthew Plody waived his right to testify. During closing arguments, the defense accused investigators of having tunnel vision.
The complete lack of investigation of any other individual is shocking. I've never seen such a poorly investigated case.
They didn't follow up on any other leads that may have happened, any other boyfriends, anybody else.
If there had been another lead, investigators certainly would have followed it. There simply wasn't.
Prosecutors told the jury that the evidence was clear. Melissa Lamesch was strangled to death by the only person who had a motive to kill her, Matthew Plody, who was juggling multiple women and didn't want to change his lifestyle.
He clearly did not want to be involved in this baby's life. This is someone who actively hid the fact that a woman in the community was carrying his child.
He clearly had made some choices about having multiple relationships, but did not make him a killer.
The trial lasted a week, and after 2 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Matthew Plody, guilty of first-degree murder.
Guilty of all charges.
I could hear people sobbing and gasping, but I couldn't even lift my head.
What did you feel?
Shock. Shock.
The verdict was a relief for Chief Robert Schultz. He says the case had long weighed on him and everyone at the firehouse who had worked with Plody.
There was a huge closure here when Matt was found guilty. You still have the family out there that lost a daughter or lost a grandson. You're never going to change that.
3 months later, on June 27, 2024, Melissa's family and friends gathered at the courthouse for sentencing. Matthew Plody listened with little reaction as victim impact statements were read.
We lost Melissa in the prime of her life. Melissa and Barrett should still be alive and enjoying life with their loving family.
I shouldn't have spent Thanksgiving that year feeling like there was nothing to be thankful for. This shouldn't be real, but it is real. It is all real because one man decided to make this decision that Barrett and Melissa weren't needed or wanted. None of this had to happen. All he had to do was walk away.
Matthew Plody also addressed the court with this brief statement.
Say anything other than I share the pain and sadness of the loss of Melissa and Barrett.
Do you believe him?
Oh, no, definitely not.
For him to say, I too have pain and loss from Melissa and Barrett, like, what a joke.
The judge imposed the maximum sentence.
Mr. Plody, you are sentenced to natural life imprisonment.
Life behind bars.
Matthew Plody will likely die in prison. Does that give you any sort of peace?
No. I know it's the justice system, and we received our justice, but nothing about this is just.
It's not fair.
Nothing about this is fair. No punishment in the world brings them back.
I miss her personality. I think it's her sass.
Melissa's sister, Julia Lynn, tries to hold on to fond memories.
Melissa was, I believe still is, the best person that I've ever met.
What do you miss most about your daughter? And there's a grandson you never got to meet.
Where do you start? I mean, he was going to come into my home. I was looking forward to raising him.
Through all of their grief, the Lamesch family honors Melissa in many ways.
We took toys to a local homeless shelter.
To honor Barrett?
To honor Barrett. We donated money to the no-kill shelter that Melissa got her cat from.
They also sponsored a tree at a local arboretum that Melissa loved.
Every year at the holidays, this tree will always be lit as part of their display.
Shining brightly like Melissa always did.
Also strong. She was fierce. She was powerful. nothing was going to stop her, and she was always going to prove herself, and she'd do whatever it takes to do it.
You've probably heard of the NCIS from the hit TV series, but we're about to take you inside its real-life work. Listen to 48 Hours NCIS early and ad-free on the 48 Hours Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts.
As a kid growing up in Chicago, there was one horror movie I was too scared to watch. It was called Candyman. But did you know that the movie Candyman was partly inspired by an actual murder? Listen to Candyman, the true story behind the bathroom mirror murder, wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Post-mortem. I'm your host, Anne-Marie Green, and today we're discussing the case of Melissa Lamesch. Now, the day before Thanksgiving in 2020, firefighters responded to smoke at an Illinois home. But once they were inside, they found Melissa. She was 9 months pregnant, dead on her kitchen floor. She was scheduled to give birth actually 2 days later. She was going to be induced. So, of course, there's a lot to discuss when it comes to this case. We are joined today by CBS correspondent Nikki Battiste and 48 Hours producer Ruth Chenetz. Thanks for being here.
It's good to see you.
Hello, thanks.
Okay, so just a reminder to everyone, I say this every week. If you haven't listened to the 48 Hours episode yet, you can find the full audio just below this episode in your podcast feed. So go take a listen and then come back for this conversation. Okay, let's get into it. So Matthew Plody, he's suspected of killing Melissa and the baby that they were expecting and then setting the fire in her home to conceal the death. But what's surprising about this is that he's an actual firefighter. And so one would think if anyone would be able to set a fire that would be difficult to investigate, it would be him.
That was actually one of my very first thoughts when we were researching this story is, wait a second. He seems like the one person who might be able to set a fire that would destroy evidence, but he's a firefighter. He's not an arson investigator. He doesn't necessarily know how to start the perfect fire. And remember, if he did in fact do this, he would have wanted to destroy all the evidence, but he would have no way of knowing exactly how to commit the perfect crime in that way.
And even as you know from other stories we do, people have plans and they make mistakes. Who knows what happened, if he panicked, if he didn't complete his plan. But yeah, it's somebody who usually puts out fires, starting a fire.
Yeah, putting out a fire is definitely much different. The oven wasn't on, the burners were turned off. But when you see pictures of the crime scene, and anyone who watched the show sees, the kitchen is destroyed where she was found, but a lot of the rest of the house, including the room that had stuff for the baby, which is gut-wrenching to see, was intact.
So we know from the hour that the relationship between Melissa and Plody, it wasn't great. But it had never been a real sort of solid relationship anyways. Do we know anything about Melissa's family and Plody, whether they had a relationship?
Her older sister had heard about him, but didn't meet him. So it was one of these friends on again, off again. They never really dated. They were never boyfriend, girlfriend. The people that we spoke to had not met him before. And the older sister recalled hearing about him from when they were friends, like how you talk about your group of friends to your siblings.
Melissa and Matthew Plody had known each other for some time. They met during college. They went to different colleges, but they met at a trivia night at a bar. And as Ruth said, had this casual relationship. But I remember Cassie, one of her sisters who we talked to in the hour, telling a story about Melissa saying that the father of her baby was a bald firefighter. And Cassie went on Facebook sort of scouring, trying to figure it out, and did. And sort of said, is it him?
Really?
And she's like, I believe confirmed it.
The reason she wasn't telling people the name is because, according to the family, Melissa was like, he doesn't really want to be part of this. And so why do I need to tell you who he is if he's not going to be part of the life of the baby?
How did her family feel about that?
Well, I know Gus, Melissa's dad, he didn't want to know the name because
He didn't want to know.
He didn't want to know who the father was because the father didn't want to be in the baby's life. And I think as Melissa's father, he's probably mad. Like,
Right.
I don't even want to know who this guy is. I think my dad would feel that way.
Right.
But I think probably her sister clearly wanted to know.
Right.
I'd probably do the same thing.
Yeah.
I'd be all over Facebook.
And the family said, don't worry about it. If he doesn't want to help you, that's fine. We will. We'll help you financially. We'll help you with support. She had a lot of brothers and sisters. She was already an aunt. So they were like, don't worry, we'll help you.
Yeah. If there's anything that you get from this hour about her is that if there's somebody who could handle being a single mother, she could. Like, she'd take on the challenge, and you certainly see that she has a village supporting her. What about Plodi's parents? I mean, this would have been their grandchild.
Matthew did not want his parents to know he was expecting a baby, and Melissa decided ultimately to take it upon herself to tell Matt's parents. And as we understand it, they probably later spoke to him about it. So we don't know for sure. Investigators say they don't know for sure if that could have set him off, but certainly in our interview with some of Melissa's family, they wondered if it did. I remember Deanna, her mom, saying, if only she hadn't told his parents, would she maybe be here? Would my grandson maybe be here?
According to Melissa's sister, Melissa told her that his parents were like, isn't that exciting? We're here. We'll help you. And the reason she did it, she mentioned to her family, I might tell his parents. And they're like, why bother? Leave well enough alone. But she felt very strongly they had a right to know. This is according to her family, that his parents had a right to know that they were going to be grandparents. And she was, wanted other people in the baby's life. And she always thought they seemed like nice people. So she didn't see why she shouldn't tell them.
Mm-hmm. Which is admirable and says a lot about Melissa. We did try to speak with his parents, but they didn't want to sit down with us with 48 hours. But they were, as we understand it, there at the trial. The defense said they certainly were supporting him. We saw them the day of the sentencing.
Really? Could you say, I know it's hard to tell, but what was their demeanor like? I mean, this has got to be incredibly tough for them.
Stoic. I remember they were very serious.
But we never had the chance to speak to them to know what they think now, after the trial.
So Melissa's family, they kind of know of Plody and they know that he's the father of the child, but they don't know much else. They know he's a firefighter. When Melissa's body is found in that house that has been set on fire, did they immediately think he might be responsible for this?
They did. The family did, not necessarily investigators. And the reason was that Melissa had been on the phone with her older sister, Cassie, earlier that day of the fire, and they're talking about the baby, they're talking about Thanksgiving, and Melissa says, I gotta go, Matt's at the door.
Right.
Something like that. And she said, I'll call you back. And that was the last anybody heard from Melissa.
Yeah.
So right away, they know he's at the house. And I think to the family, because he had been at the house that day, she didn't want anything to do with him. And he had come by the house 2 days before too. And she's like, why does he keep coming? To them right away, they're thinking he may be involved. Investigators, look at it a little differently. Obviously, he's a person of interest because he was there, and they called him in for, questioning that evening. The evening of the fire, he willingly came and spoke with them. But also you have to remember in the beginning too, you don't know for certain that she was even murdered.
Right.
There's a fire, she's in the kitchen, she's dead. Maybe she was cooking something and it went up.
And they don't really know what caused the fire, right?
No, they never found, a device. Investigators had dogs come in and sniff for accelerant. They didn't find any accelerant. They didn't find any electrical issues. So what they determined was that it was started at the cabinets above the stove. They believed, to make it look like something happened in the kitchen.
I think for this story, it mattered less what started the fire. What mattered was it accidental or was it intentional? An accidental fire and an intentional fire could both be started in the same way, really. Yeah. So I think that was really what it was all about.
So this is something that you guys may not know, but do you know if they had an adversarial relationship?
She was not afraid of him. Like, it wasn't like, oh my God, I'm not going to open the door. And Matthew Plody had zero criminal record. You know, he was known to be sort of quiet at work. It wasn't someone where you have like, oh, you know, that employee who flies off the handle all the time. That was not Matt. And she tried to, you know, keep the door open in case he wanted to be involved, but she really had no reason to be afraid of him.
So, you know, perhaps one of the saddest sort of aspects to this story is that Melissa's mother, Deanna, who is waiting for her grandchild to be born and is expecting the new child into her life in just a few days, she meets her grandson for the first time at the funeral. She holds his hand because her daughter can't. You can't help but to sort of fight back tears and imagine the pain that she is feeling.
Yeah, which I am.
Yeah.
I have a baby, so every time I think about this, I still get emotional. Yeah, Deanna wanted to see her daughter and her grandson, Barrett, who, remember, was a baby about to come out into the world. And Deanna carries around a picture with her. In the picture is Barrett. And she's holding Barrett's hand, Deanna, and she keeps that in her wallet and carries it around. And to see the picture just sort of makes your heart stop for a minute. You realize what this family has lost. She's lost her own daughter, her grandson. Her daughter's lost a child she never got to meet. I mean, it's horrific in every way. And for me, seeing that photo is just something I'll never forget.
Welcome back to Postmortem. So investigators interviewed Plody twice, first on the evening of the murder and then 9 months later. Clips from both of those interviews were actually shown during the hour, but both went on for much longer, obviously, than you can ever show in an episode. The second interview lasted a full 7 hours, but what was his demeanor like during those interviews?
Well, he willingly agreed to those interviews, and there was no lawyer present. He didn't even hire a lawyer until later. 7 hours sounds like a long time if there was talking going on. They would ask a question, and often he either didn't answer or there'd be 2 minutes before he would answer. So most of the 7 hours were the investigators asking questions, trying to get him to talk, and him saying very little.
And I think, too, what's striking or what might strike a jury is not once is he emotional. And I think, you know, juries, humans, like to watch behavior. And behavior, as his lawyers would point out, doesn't mean guilt or innocence, no matter what it is. But it's hard to tell a jury that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The defense says for as long as we've known him, that's how he is when we talk to him. But the investigators say, you know, we were accusing him of some pretty horrendous things. And most people would say, enough, leave me alone.
Right.
How dare you? And he was very calm and not saying much.
I think for me, what strikes me the most is neither of his interviews did he ever say, I didn't kill Melissa and our baby. And I would think if you are in fact innocent, you would probably say that.
Absolutely. But even sort of one of the clips that is in the episode where they say to him, Melissa is dead. And I don't know exactly the phrasing that they used, but he's like, oh. And I thought, isn't like the first impulse to be like, what happened?
And again, the defense looks at it and says, well, look, he didn't get rattled. So
interesting.
Yeah.
So another kind of interesting component of this hour has to do with the fire chief, right? His boss, Fire Chief Rob Schultz. He agreed to wear a wire and confront Plody about the night of the murder. And initially, Fire Chief Rob Schultz says that he said no. And I kind of understood why, because I thought, you know, you're the leader of these group of men and women. They have to trust you to go to you. And this is kind of a betrayal of that trust for a really good reason, a murder investigation. But still, I could understand why he would waffle on it a little bit.
And you could see the pain in his face when Nikki spoke to him about this, where he's like, I don't readily talk about it. I'm not proud that I did this, but there's a grieving family out there looking for answers. And in the end, he didn't have to wear, like, they put something on his phone on the desk. But he's a wonderfully thoughtful man who cares about his firehouse. And you can sense how troubled he is by all of this.
And when he first got the call that Matthew Plody was being investigated for the murder of, he didn't even know about Melissa, had never heard the name Melissa Lamesch.
Right.
He didn't know there was a baby. But when he was told all of this and that Matthew was being investigated, he couldn't believe it. He was like, no way, not the Matthew that I know. Like, he knows him. He's known him for years. But he said, I think the moment for him where he thought, wait, maybe something is, maybe Matthew is involved, is that Matthew had taken off that day from work. And I think for him, that was the moment where things started to fall into place.
And it wasn't just that it couldn't be Matthew. To Chief Schultz, the concept of a firefighter, someone who saves lives, who helps people he was like, it couldn't be any of my guys because that's not what we do. Again, Matthew willingly came in, and I think some of it was, gee, am I ever going to get my job back? That maybe that might have been part of the lure. And Chief Schultz was like, look, I will help you deal with this. Like, if you tell me, I can go with you to the police. You can call me at 2 a.m. Rob Schultz thought if he could appeal to him on that way, but he
wouldn't give anything.
Yeah, didn't say anything.
What I really got from the fire chief was that he not only felt a little uncomfortable doing this, but also he was questioning himself a little bit. I know this guy. What did I miss? Which I think we see often in many of these 48 hours cases.
Chief Schultz is pure good.
Yeah, you get
and
that.
I think he wants to think that of everyone in his life and his firefighters. And his world has been, his world will never be the same.
Okay, let's talk a bit about the trial now. What was Plody's main defense at the trial?
Well, there were two things that the defense found inadequate. An inadequate investigation that maybe to question other old boyfriends or other people, and then that the fire itself was not investigated well enough.
Right. And the person that the defense mentioned in their closing argument was Gus, Melissa's dad, saying, you never looked at Gus, you never questioned him. He was at the grocery store buying groceries for Thanksgiving when he got the call about the fire. Like, why didn't you verify that he wasn't at the house earlier? And they were making that point.
In fact, I want to play a portion of our interview with defense attorney John Cupp that was not in the show, where he explained just why he made this argument.
Our job is to point out things that give a jury doubt. The detectives involved in this case should have taken steps to determine where someone like Gus Lamesch or other people in the neighborhood, they should have determined where those people were or could have been at the time of this, alleged crime, but they didn't do any of that.
And here's another unaired clip from Gus Lamesch reacting to the argument during his victim impact statement.
And not only do I have Melissa and Barrett taken from me, they want to accuse me of killing them. How heartless do you have to be able to do this to a grieving parent? This was insult to injury.
I don't believe that the defense truly thinks Gus had anything to do with it. They were using Gus as a concrete example of here's a timeline, and you didn't even check that. But to Gus, obviously, as he said, it's like insult upon injury.
It's a bold move, I think, on the defense part. And I asked the lawyers, is there a shred of evidence that Gus had anything to do with Melissa's murder, with the fire, anything? And they said no. So it was, but look, as defense lawyers, as they do, we're just trying to create some sort of doubt. And that was one of the ways they did it.
Right.
And I think they chose Gus because he gets the call at the supermarket. And that could have been something very easy. Call the supermarket, see if he was really there.
It's his house.
And they didn't do it. But the prosecutor said if there were other people worth looking at, investigators would have. So that's why to them, it wasn't tunnel vision. They looked at who they needed to look at.
You know, hearing Gus refer to that in his victim statement was powerful. I remember, I think we even looked at each other like, ugh. And then also we sat down with Gus after that day, and he had such raw emotion. You know, I feel like dads sometimes try to be really tough, and it was so sad and so heartbreaking.
Melissa had moved in. Her parents were divorced. She had moved in with Gus into their childhood home because she had to stop working as the baby was coming. And Gus, in the interview, said to Nikki, you know, he was looking forward to like almost raising this child. Sure, move into my house. I'll give you some help.
Clearly, they were so close. She's living with him. He's supporting her. There's a room in his house ready for a baby with diapers and teddy bears, and he's lost it all and his house.
Right. You reveal, and we talked about this earlier in the hour, that Melissa's baby was going to be named Barrett. What's the story behind that name?
It's a sweet story. It's a great name. I love the name. According to her family, Melissa never told anyone the name, but they really wanted to try to figure it out. They knew that she liked double letters. They knew it was a boy, and she was calling the baby Little Bear. So after she passed, they were able to see her internet searches. And one of them was, what does the name Barrett mean? So they decided to go with that name. And coincidentally, one of the meanings of the name Barrett is bear strength.
Oh.
Which is sweet. So that's the name that he was given. That's the name that's on his tombstone with his mom.
I mean, if there's anything that I get from this is that this really did not have to happen. If the theory is true that he just didn't want to be a dad, he didn't have to be. She was fine without him. And it sounds like she was a powerhouse. She would have been an amazing mother, but you did very well at bringing her to life. So another excellent hour. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, she sounds like she was an incredible woman.
Yeah.
And would have been a great mom.
Indeed, indeed. If you like the series, please rate and review 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts and follow 48 Hours wherever you get your podcasts. You can also listen ad-free on Amazon Music, Wondery Plus, and the Wondery app, or with a 48 Hours Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much for listening.